Welcome to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Council Culture, Byfield's Business of Law podcast. Today I'm joined by Ben Girdleston. Hi Ben, how are you doing?
Not too bad, Olivia. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad at all. It's a lot quieter, isn't it?
It's really quiet.
Yeah.
There's not a lot out there suddenly. We do suddenly feel as if we are getting that August vibe, where I think on the 7th. I guess the biggest thing in the past week has been the finalisation of the merger between McDermott and Will and Sholters, it's now called, which is significant, isn't it? You got a big, it's not a transatlantic merger, but it's two big US firms merging with each other. And that tells you that there's appetite there to do deals. We saw HSF Kramer, before the summer. There's a lot of talk and a lot of rumours about mergers coming. So maybe this is a precursor to a very busy autumn. But yep, it feels quite quiet.
Yes, certainly. Not in the office though.
No.
Very busy. Very busy
going.
for us.
We
Exactly. Apart from that sort of big headline story, we have a story here by Maria Ward-Brennan, reporter at City AM this week, which basically is about the rise of partner vetting at law firms. So if you have, as quoted here by Maria, a bad apple and you announce them as a new lateral hire and there's so much, emphasis on them and how exciting it is and what they're going to bring to the firm, and then all of a sudden it comes out, maybe there's a bit of a dark past there, a few skeletons in the closet. So do you think there should be more of a vetting around before you hire?
Well, you read this piece and you see that there's a lot of vetting, probably more than you can imagine, but the risks are very high. You take a step back and you look at this piece. It's in City AM. It's not in law.com or the lawyer. And what that tells you and what it reminds you of it, we are in the personality-driven business, aren't we? Where firms are characterized by their senior partners and their partners. You think of Weiss, you probably think of Neil Sachdev. There's many similar kind of examples. And you look at this and you think, boy, yeah, the risks are really high when you hire a new partner, not just from a business perspective, but from a reputational perspective as well. They're like celebrities, right? Some of these, big characters. And I think that the piece actually explores that quite well. There's a number of recruiters and those involved with the recruitment quoted. Some of their quotes are quite entertaining and slightly probably over the top, but they do raise very, very good points. There was a partner in a US firm who was let go less than a month after being hired, which the piece talks about, when a series of rather unsavory posts that he'd made on social media came to light. I mean, normally what you have is a risk period of a couple of years where your partners will come across and have a log-in period where they're guaranteed a certain amount of money, and then they have to really kind of get into gear with deals, cases, whatever that they've been brought in to win. But this chap lasted just a couple of weeks, and there was quite a lot of coverage on it, if I remember.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another quote here that says a bad hire isn't just a misstep, it's a potential scandal. And it could be disastrous for firms, which then brings us into play as well, Ben. So if this was hypothetically to happen to a client, how would we handle that? How would you handle that?
It's a good question. And the first thing you do is you look at due diligence, don't you? If somebody doesn't work out, it's like, why they're not worked out? Did you not see this coming? And that's why what's talked about in this piece and other things that we're going to talk about in the recruitment space is so important, to have robust processes that you can talk to, where you can. These are the steps that we take. These are the things that we look at. These are the checks that we do. You have to be able to describe those quite convincingly, I think, if this happens to you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes so much further now, doesn't it, than just a CV or sort of, your client base, etc. It is looking at social media, which it's difficult. Obviously, there is a line between if someone has, made overtly sort of, racist or, something along those lines, a comment like that on social media, that makes complete sense to let them go. But But where do you draw the line? When it comes to if someone says something that maybe isn't appropriate, can you sack them over that? I think the lines could get blurred a little bit, but in this day and age, that's where we are, and people do have to be careful because, as you say, lawyers are, they are kind of celebrities. They need to be careful about what they're putting out there online. So it's a really interesting area of debate, I think. And laterals keep the legal press going. So
They do.
You've got to make sure that you're making the right moves and the right hires.
Yeah, lateral appointments are hard currency, aren't they?
Oh yeah,
in terms of law firm profiles, so you need to make sure you get it right.
And I mean, speaking of the lateral market, we have another story here written by Ryan Haroff, in The American Lawyer, which is about private equity partners in New York. They're making fewer moves, even though the market itself, the lateral market, is on the up. Now, this is off the basis of a McRae report, one of our clients, McRae Legal Recruitment Firm. They have come out with a private equity in New York report, which delves into all kinds of statistics about lateral hires in 2024 and the first half of 2025. So Ben, over to you in terms of what do you think these statistics really show?
Yeah, well, we know McRae pretty well, as you've said, so we're pretty familiar with this world. But there's one stat in here which is just near the top and is so surprising, that New York firms have only been 9 partner moves in private equity in the first half of this year. It's 9. That just is surprising, isn't it? And that tells you, I guess, a couple of things. That highly skilled private equity partners are very well prized, and it takes time to make moves, isn't it? And not least in the climate of Trump executive orders, etc., and having been in New York a couple of times this year, the mood music, as we've talked about in other editions of the podcast, has been quite subdued, and I think the stats sort of prove that to be right.
Exactly, and I mean, I think it's interesting to see the way that London has moved compared to New York. New York has been described by McRae as more cautious and deliberate in their hiring of PE partners over the past sort of first half of this year. And I think that is due to, obviously, the sort of geopolitical state of maybe the US and then further, and how PE firms are reacting to that. And, from reading this article, the word that really stands out here is just uncertainty. And I think that's what it's coming down to here, which is unfortunate. But, these things always tend to pick up again.
Yeah. There's always, right. There's always a cycle, isn't there?
Exactly.
I think if you probably looked at some of the private equity hiring in the previous 3 or 4 years,
yeah,
the numbers would be pretty high. And it's pretty normal that in a slowdown, even if it's temporary, that hiring stops, because people don't necessarily want to move,
no.
And people don't necessarily want to hire. But it certainly kind of picks up. It certainly picks up again. But I think we're always reminded that partner hiring takes a long time. It's not just like a sort of average person going from one average job to another. You've got the financial stakes and all that sort of stuff. It takes, from initial conversations, it takes a long time to make a kind of, a partner accrue, doesn't it? But yeah, numbers here are reasonably low, and it'll be very interesting to see what, I guess, the second half of the year looks like. And one hopes that the economic climate, tariffs and things aside, is a bit more conducive to movement. I guess a lot will depend on deal volumes. If firms have got a big book of business, they're going to need to hire.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And as we say, we'll be keeping an eye out to see sort of what the moves look like in the second half of the year, especially after this report has come out. I think it's brought it more to our attention. Next, we have a bit of a really interesting story here, which has come out today in The Times by Seren Hughes. It's about Rod Stewart's AI tribute to Ozzy Osbourne. He is basically singing a song. It's a tribute to Ozzy, and there's a lot of other stars that are involved in this video. Jimi Hendrix, Tina Turner, Freddie Mercury, and obviously it's so sad that Ozzy obviously unfortunately passed away. But I think this is just a bit strange, isn't it? And it's raised a lot of legal eyebrows, is what Seren says in the headline here. So yeah, Ben, what do you make of this in general, and what do you think about the legalities of it all?
Well, I think it looks very weird. I have to say, I was at the Oasis concert at Wembley, just going to get that in, Saturday, which was mega and awesome. But during Live Forever, which I think most of our listeners will know, they had flashing images of people who had passed, and Ozzy was there, and it was just his image.
Oh wow,
and that was cool. So there was no kind of issue with that. But
yeah.
I actually read this on the tube this morning. We were recording on a Thursday, and it's just very odd. So what Rod Stewart has done, he's singing this song Forever Young, and he's got pictures of Ozzy Osbourne superimposed from an AI perspective of Jimi Hendrix and others. But actually, from a legal podcast perspective, there's some pretty interesting views from a variety of lawyers, including a barrister and a couple of law firm partners who have slightly differing views, actually. And one of the things that sort of reminds you of, if you have a PR brief and you're in-house in a law firm or what have you, it's always tough to get IP coverage, right? It's generally quite technical, etc. But boy, when there's an entertainment story involving lyrics or, licensing of albums or whatever it might be, boy, you as a IP lawyer, you get a chance to have your time in the sun in terms of not literally, but in terms of press coverage. But it is, I know it's August and it's a quiet time, but it's an extraordinary story, and it just seems strange. And I question Rod Stewart's judgment a little bit with this, I have to say.
Yeah, obviously his heart was in the right place. He didn't obviously mean any harm by it, and by all means it could have went completely the opposite direction. Everyone could have loved it and be reposting it, on their stories or whatever. But unfortunately, it hasn't went that way. It's maybe a bit insensitive.
He's got two issues, Rod, isn't he? Potentially, which are easily navigable. He could be accused of either, I'm no lawyer, but let me get this right, of passing off, which is basically insinuating that some of these dead people are supporting him or endorsing him in some shape or form for commercial gain, which he's not doing, because he's already sold his tickets. And secondly, that he's not defaming them by presenting them in a slightly dodgy way or anything like that. And clearly he's not doing that, although it's cumbersome, it's some praise. So legally, you asked me about that, I think he's probably all right.
Yes, exactly. And, it also mentions here in the article about the fact that the UK Parliament has actually really shied away from regulating AI in general, especially the underlying IP sort of assets. So I think Rod himself will be okay, but I think that it sparked a really interesting conversation that, there's, as you said just there's so many different ways to look at it: defamation, passing off, all of this sort of stuff that, yeah, it's opened a bit of a can of worms potentially, and might teach, future celebrities not to do the same. Okay, and then we've got one last... How do I put
Good
this?
luck explaining this one.
Yeah.
Glad you're doing it, not me, but we're going to...
Yeah. So it's also in the Times. It's by Jonathan Ames. Let me just read out the headline. So it's wives who married bigamist on same Las Vegas street fight over his fortune. So a lot to take in there. So we've got a bigamist who has married two women, both in Vegas, and he had no will and left a 1.8 million estate. So his most recent wife and his other wife are now arguing over who gets this estate, and now his son is also involved as well. His most recent wife is saying that, she, looked after him whilst he was, dying, etc., and she deserves some of that too. And his other wife is obviously saying, no, I deserve it, and it's a case that is ongoing. Yeah, it's almost like whose side are you on here? You know?
Yeah, you've got to read it. You've got to read it a couple of times. So we've got this chap who married someone and then married someone else on the same Las Vegas street, obviously some years apart, has died without leaving a will, and they are fighting over his fortune. Now, I would wager that Jonathan has quite enjoyed covering this week, and it's quite a story, isn't it? And as he says at the beginning, what happens in Vegas is meant to stay in Vegas, but hey ho, it's made its way into the into the Times. Now, genuinely, slight bafflement and a bit of amusement aside, it will be very interesting to see what side this falls on, because you read a lot about divorce law and rules related to marriage, etc. If the non-wife, I don't know, get my terms right here, but the second spouse, and I'm doing the inverted commas sign with my hands, is given anything, then I think it would be quite an interesting precedent, wouldn't it? And there may be some challenges and things ahead. If I was a judge, I was just being a Solomon, just sit down the middle and say, off you go.
Not dealing with this, yeah.
It was just a story that amused me, and I had to read it a couple of times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about the second wife obviously marrying him in good faith and having no idea about the previous wife, which I think will stand in court. Good faith always stands quite well in court if the evidence can back it up. And I think the evidence also that she looked after him as he was dying, etc., all goes to show she was obviously a supportive spouse as well. So she definitely has a case, in my opinion. So as I say, yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting to see where this goes. And, Jonathan Ames ends on, the case continues. So I'm excited. I'm excited for part 2, 3, 4. Who knows how long this will go on for. But yeah, what an interesting, it seems like it could be a Netflix TV show.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think so.
Exactly.
I have to say that I think we're getting towards the end, but the best thing that I personally have read this week, there's a Q&A in the FT on Tuesday with Dan Needle, who I think a lot of people will know, is the former head of tax at Clifford Chance, who set up and I'm going to try and describe him properly. He set up Tax Policy Associates, which is a non-profit which basically informs policymakers and journalists on tax policy, and he calls out things that he doesn't think are right. But I just urge people to read it, whether you agree with him or don't agree with him or on his side or not. It's just a great interview. It's really funny and quite informative. So I just wanted just to say that towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to give it a listen, and we will link it obviously in our podcast description. Well, I mean, thank you so much, Ben, for joining me for another episode. A lot of interesting stories there, a lot to digest. And yeah, it's been a great episode. So thank you for joining me and thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
You've been listening to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.